So here's the thing. My approach is I wanted to know what's going on behind people's eyes. There's a lot of people interviewing what's going on outside, right? So the main intent just with me starting this is I'm trying to see like what life is like behind your eyes. Now, granted, we're a changing being, we change. So this is where at first, here, I'll just go into the first question. So you can share a bit about yourself, and then I don't know, bro. You
Yeah,
want to share a little bit about yourself, and then I'll go to the next question. Maybe that's fine.
sure. So I'm perspective philosophy. I've studied philosophy now for around 10 years. I have a degree from Newcastle in philosophy and a master's degree from Durham. And I was doing my PhD until recently. So yeah, I've done philosophy for a long time, and I do philosophy online. I teach philosophy. I talk philosophy. I do all things philosophy. So yeah, that's me.
Okay, great. So can you walk me through like how you opened up to this, just as a person, because most people they just want to go fit into society, but the philosopher mind has a questioning angle, I feel, to it, right? So how did you get into philosophy? Were you like that as a kid? Just as a kid, inquisitive?
Well, I was raised a Catholic, and I would say one of the oh god, someone's at my door.
It's all
um, one sec. Do you mind if I quickly go and answer my door?
yeah, man. Yeah, it's all good.
I'm really sorry. One second. Charlie, calm down. Sorry, I think I'm actually getting like pranked or something because me dog keeps getting rang. Like someone keeps ringing me buzzer, and I've got to go down from me like apartment. But no one's there, so like it's happened a few times now. So sorry about
No worries, man. It's
that.
maybe you're having like ingenious ideas and the doorbell is ringing exactly at the same time, you know.
Maybe,
You know?
or maybe I'm not having any ideas, and it's just I'm imagining the doorbell ringing. I'm
Yo,
escaping
that's deep,
reality. I'm not
man.
in reality. Yeah. I'm like, yeah, no. So yeah, I started philosophy. To jump into it, I started philosophy. Really like when I was in A levels. That's when I started like academic philosophy. But I did philosophy as a kid, kind of, in the form of like theology. So like speculative thought about the existence of God. So I grew up in a Catholic household, but were very much encouraged to be scientific. My family really enjoy science, and so there was this sort of
So,
push
sorry
not
to
to just
interrupt, but would you go to church as a kid? Did you have
yes, yeah, I
like
would go to
oh,
church.
okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
I'd go to
okay.
church. I went to Catholic school. So I went to church. I went to
Okay.
Catholic school, and my mom would read. I mean, like when I was like 9, my mom read us like Richard Dawkins, the blind watchmaker and stuff. So it wasn't like my mom was very much interested in like evolutionary biology,
Uh-huh.
um, and like biology in general. Like so she was like a nurse, but a Catholic, so she's reading this like
Right, right.
from the other side, like and so like there was this sort of debate of like what is the existence of God and how strong are the arguments against his existence. And even as a kid, I thought Richard Dawkins' arguments weren't entirely convincing. Not in terms of evolution. I think his evolutionary arguments are brilliant, but his
So, so,
philosophical one's a
so,
bit of a
so the
letdown.
reality, sorry to interrupt. So the reality of religion, it was like real from you since childhood, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah. So like, yeah, like well, like in trying to to understand God, the Bible, like creation, the world
right,
around us.
right.
Yeah. And then when I hit A levels, that was a big difference, like in terms of the way I came at it. So when I was younger, it was very speculative and very like unstructured. It was more sophistic than it was, academic and philosophical, like
Mhm.
genuinely philosophical. Um, it had a semblance of like rational structure, but no real sort of methodology to it. And then at A level, I was introduced to I did the philosophy of religion because it was a Catholic school. But the philosophy of religion was just philosophy and ethics. And so
Right.
a broad amount of thinkers, studying from, Plato, Aristotle, Immanuel Kant, and so on. But at a quite a shallow level still. And then I did a degree, and when I was doing my degree, I became an agnostic because after I was actually some of the philosophers I've read in I don't know how long you want us to go on for, but
No, be
some of the
comfortable,
philosophers.
man. Just share it. I'm more interested in what the imagery of what you say. So it's all good.
Oh, it's cool. So essentially, I had read about the arguments via negativa about the existence of God. And so there was the scholastics, like many scholastics didn't believe you could talk about God in a way which was non-allegorical. You could only say what God wasn't, not what God was, because to attribute something to God would be to diminish his perfection.
Uh-huh.
And so then at that point, essentially, I didn't think that it was meaningful to talk about the existence of God or to attribute anything to God because it seemed to go beyond human comprehension in terms of knowledge either way, whether it's the existence of God or non-existence of God. And I sort of fell in the line of the parable of the partisan and the stranger and the parable of the celestial city from Hick. And
Can you
essentially, the
can you share
parable,
that with me, what that is exactly? I'm not
yeah.
familiar.
So the parable of the partisan and the stranger was given by an Oxford professor in order to counteract the logical positivists, who were a group of people. One actually, he was a Anthony Flew. Actually, was to counteract him, which was an offshot of the logical positivists. So there
Uh-huh.
was this turn of the 20th century in Britain. There was a group called the logical positivists, and not just Britain, but in Europe, the Vienna Circle was a group of they sort of like analytic philosophers who got together and they tried to make essentially a movement called logical positivism, coined by AJA, in order to essentially limit the the meaning of what we could talk about, so that we weren't that we could dismiss certain concepts or certain conversations as meaningless. And the way they did that was to say, well, anything which cannot be verified, this is called the verification
Yeah.
principle.
Mhm.
Anything which cannot be verified is meaningless. And that led to its own defeat because how do you verify the verification
Yeah,
principle?
the true ones too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So so he ended up saying, well, anything which in principle could be verified, and then it's like, well, people just started saying stuff like, well, okay, if I was God in principle, if I was God, I would verify my own existence. Or if in principle 2000 years ago, and I would have witnessed Jesus be crucified. And it was so he realized that like it didn't work at all, and so he ended up with dismissing it as a failure. But it did lead to an important philosophical development, which was falsification. And
Mhm.
Anthony Flew um, took the concept of falsification and ran with it, arguing that which could not be falsified was meaningless. And he just demonstrated this in what was called the parable of the gardener, or the story of the gardener. And essentially, two people go to they're in the rainforest, and they come across a wood a lovely garden in the
Mhm.
middle of this rainforest, tranquil, like picturesque, but it looks deliberate, looks intentional. And
Right.
one individual says, this is intentional. And the other individual says, it's not. This is natural. This is formed like just by happenstance. This is
Mhm.
okay. Well, why don't we set traps to find out if there's a gardener coming to maintain this then? And so they try to set traps, and no traps are sprung. And so the one who says that there's a gardener says, but the gardener. So at first he says, well, why can't I see a gardener? He says, oh, the gardener's invisible. And he says, oh, so set traps. And they said, oh, well, the gardener's intangible. And it keeps going until the gardener is qualified more and more. And Anthony Flew, who later converts to Catholicism, I think Christianity, uh, uh, he actually he says God dies the death of 1,000 qualifications. Um, and the point was to say if it's not falsifiable, then it is pointless to talk about.
Mhm.
And the parables that I referenced before the ones of the partisan and the stranger and the celestial city are rebukes of that point to say, yes, it might be that this is an unfalsifiable claim from the perspective we're in.
Mhm.
But the parable of the celestial city is that there's two people walking down a road, and one says that they're walking down this road for a purpose, and it's to get to a celestial city at the end. And at the end of this journey, they will be rewarded for their hardships and for the tasks that the king of the city sends them. And the other says this path is meaningless, but we have to walk it anyway. And they walk along, and along the road they get robbed, they face loads of trials and
Mhm.
tribulations. And Hick argues it is meaningful for them to talk about whether their journey is purposeful, because at the end they will find out or not. And
Right, right. This is, this is reminding me of like how Socrates was saying, like at the end of his death, he's going to go somewhere where all the questions he's had is going to be answered, you know?
he's like the
Something
world
in,
of forms.
yeah.
Yeah, like Socrates is all
So,
about this
so,
this
so here's the thing.
transcendence.
I would really love for you to even like correct my view. I have this view, like starting from Aristotle, that back then they actually started from a metaphysical consideration of reality. So this guy was thinking that imagination and reality are like things like powers of the soul. That's the way I was interpreting it, right? It's coming from the soul, right? And
Hmm.
then over history, this thing that was treated as divine or unknown or spontaneous in, let's say, yogic traditions or whatnot, right, suddenly became associated to part of the brain, right? So something that was like a divine verb, I don't know, somehow turned into like a noun-like machine, right? So right
Yeah,
now they're treating imagination as if it's just from your brain, right? But back in the day, it was as if I would say maybe divinity was their imagination even,
it
right?
was a logos. Yeah,
Right.
100%. So I mean, if we look
So
to
how do you
the
reconcile these? Like, how do you see these ideas of like what was there a divine force, or how do you even see that? If
I
I can
think the
ask the
ancients
idea of
were
God, even.
closer. I think the ancients were closer to what is the correct view. I think that we've somewhat lost the way. And when I say we, I mean like Anglo-American culture specifically,
Mhm.
like European culture as well, actually for that matter, but maybe less so on the continent. But the especially like Anglo-American culture, and to be entirely honest with you, I mean the like this is totally, I'm not saying this because I'm biased or anything. Like I don't mean
No, no, it's fine.
no shade against Protestantism or anything, right? So I think Protestantism is a I think there's a lot of valuable Protestant philosophers. I think there's a lot of valuable Protestant thought. You know, I and I think that the Protestants have a great. I mean, my favorite philosopher is Protestant. So, but the thing is that and he wasn't the problem. So
Can I know who that is?
there was that's Hegel. That's
Hegel.
Hegel.
Okay, okay.
But the problem I think that has happened that is sort of infested our culture is that it was a kind of baby with the baby with the bathwater kind of situation, right?
Mhm.
Where at the during the medieval era, well actually during the like around the Renaissance era, like coming towards let's say the early Enlightenment, like Renaissance and then early
Right.
Enlightenment. Around this era, especially like Renaissance like era,
Mhm.
there was a great deal of rejection against Catholicism, right? And in terms of then this establishment of the Protestant tradition
Mhm.
that that we're seeing Luther. Well, that is like really the end of a story that was really bubbling up for the last 1,000 years. You see, before that, in ancient Greece, even before Christianity was like sort of adopting these ideas, as you say, they were conceiving of reality in new and varied ways. They were trying to understand what reality was, and there was different accounts for that. And the dominant philosophical accounts that came out of ancient Greece, not the only accounts, there was other ones, but
Mhm.
the dominant philosophical accounts were Platonism and Aristotelianism.
Yeah.
And Platonism especially was the most dominant because the West didn't really get didn't get Aristotle until hundreds of years later from translations from Arabic because it was destroyed. The original Greek was
They
destroyed.
find these all in a library, right? They find all this text from Plato, Aristotle in some library in Italy. Is
Well,
that
they found Plato, but Plato was passed down like a sort of
Oh, he
like
was
nice.
passed down. Okay.
Yeah, and he had a really nice time. He had a real smooth history. He did.
Super.
Aristotle was destroyed, so so uh, Aristotle was entirely destroyed. It was around the time because but the it luckily had been translated from Greek to Arabic, and so we ended up getting it from not from the Greek but from the Arabic. There's someone at my door again.
Oh, that's interesting.
Uh,
Didn't know that.
uh, one sec, I'm gonna have to answer that. Is it?
Sure.
I'll be 2 seconds. Oh, if better not be getting punked again, man. I can't
It's all
take this.
good, man. It's all
Sorry about that. Hiya. So this
another
time it wasn't.
person.
No. This time it was actually my mother and my uncle, so it's fine. Aye. So sorry about that. Okay. Oh yeah, I was just saying about Aristotle being like essentially lost, but anyways, he was recovered. But anyway, he was thought to be a heretical philosophy for the church for a long time. Because the Neoplatonism, like Platonism and Neoplatonism, fit really well. It seemed with Christian doctrine. Because it posits this sort of transcendent oneness that is the source of reality, right? So, and a dualism, and dualism seems to fit nicely. So you have the heavens and you have the earth,
Yeah.
and so it makes a nice split, at least seemingly so.
See, I might have I think actually I might not have the proper like view on this, but I was under the impression Plato was pointing, he was like one of the early ones pointing to how there's an invisible substance, you know?
Yeah, well, no, well, kind of. He wouldn't have used the word substance, which is like a.
Yo, my bad, bro. I forgot I hadn't hit the record thing, but I
Oh,
was
sorry.
recording it on my phone though.
All right, okay.
Yeah, my bad.
Uh,
I was just for a
no,
second like, yo,
it's
why am I
fine. It's fine.
texting?
Have you got the audio, or do you need it? Or
N- n- I you might have
I'll,
to like I'd
I'll just say
appreciate
it
if you
again.
could send it at
Yeah,
the
yeah.
end.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so I'll just say like basically, so yeah, essentially the dominant philosophy of the Catholic Church became Aristotelianism, and that took this sort of abstract Platonic condition, concept of the form of the good, which was separate from the reality in which you live, and this reality is kind of like a shadow world or an underworld in which is sort of animated by this abstract concept, this divine logos or mind, um, and instead brought it down into earth but to unite it with it. So it wasn't to like kind of reject it. That people see Aristotle as a rejection of Plato. He's not. He actually is just building on Plato, and he takes this idea that there is this substance, that there is a substance within reality, and that substance is the essential nature of beings. But it's grounded within the thing itself, and so you have this sort of the form, this mental construct, which is only that can only really be um, truly understood by the intellect and not the senses. It's not through the senses that we gain it, but through the intellect and the mediation of the senses. So we perceive this object, and then we mediate with we'll reflect upon it, and then we start to come to know it in its universal nature, which is shared across all of its particular instantiations. And so if you see one zebra, you start to understand the species of zebra, the essence of what a zebra is, or a chair, or an apple, or whatever it may be. And this was the dominant sort of philosophy of the Catholic Church. Now, at the time of the Reformation, what happened is that this got rejected for a uh, what came to be known as nominalism, termism, and conceptualism. So these are three different sort of
Yeah, it's
break-offs.
becoming more
Um,
structured, right? It's like people are having more
yeah,
opinions on the divine, I feel, as history's going,
well, it
right? It's like more
well,
geometries being maybe
If
put on.
anything, it's maybe a little. It's actually a little bit less. It's actually a little bit less on the divine, and it's more about it's more about this idea of that they on reality, that they have more opinions on what reality is, and they think they already know reality in a way which goes beyond what maybe an Aristotelian would think. So like they would say that they know reality as it's particular, like it's or like that they only know particulars. And so
Right.
that what we talk about is, so if I was to say a zebra, I've seen a zebra, but then when I talk about the concept of a zebra, then they'd say that this is just a name. This name is just a reference to the physical world which I've seen with my senses. And this was the birth of empiricism. And this empirical
Yeah.
form of analysis led to materialism, and materialism to the kind of physicalism in which we engage with today. And I think ethically, this has led us to be egoists for the most part.
Yeah.
So you find that most of us are egoistical and utilitarians, and we try to mediate what are particular interests between what we assume to be like monads of people, single units, in which they're separated through an incommensurable distance. And
Right.
so we have to restrain each other constantly in order to have a social interaction. That's our idea of developing relationships now. And it's because we see each other as separate, as not sharing the same interests, as not sharing the same substance. We don't share anything in common except for the fact that we can be put under the category or a name that we would consider to be an abstract form of thinking which may or may not actually correspond to reality. And this is the problem we'll have today. And it's one of the reasons we've led to ethical anti-realism. And it's
Mhm.
one of the main things that has led us to this idea that all that exists is the physical. And it's just, I think it's hilarious, because I think once you see the scientific mode of thinking ends up
Mhm.
rejecting this. If you look at theoretical physics, it ends up just, or physics in general, to be honest, ends up blowing this out of the water. I'd say since Sir Isaac Newton, even, I would say that the Kantian defense of Isaac Newton, certainly in relativity, I think this has just been it's totally incommensurable with science itself, and so it's anti-scientific, but it's proposed
Right,
as
right.
the dominant
But
scientific
this
way
brings,
of thinking.
okay, okay. So first of all, I really like how you said that, right? Like that sort of idea of a divine reality, it became conceptualized, and then people are interacting with the idea of the thing rather than the real thing, right? So you know how you said you were raised in like a Christian environment? I was raised in the opposite. I was born in Iran, and I was raised in a religious society. Like church and state weren't separate. So every kid
Yeah,
from a young age, you had to know religion, you had to know the names of the prophets, you had to know like the ideas, right? And my mother was religious. My father, he had lived in America, he was a bit like spiritual. Okay. Like I don't remember him seeing him pray or whatnot, but very intuitive person. Okay. So at some point I was like, what is everybody worshiping? I don't know if you had that experience. Okay. I was like, okay, what is everybody worshiping? And I'm like, wait a minute. Everybody's worshiping an inconceivable idea. Do you know? So
yeah,
that
yeah,
was
I
that
do.
was the thing where my mind's like, okay, it's like even in certain religious books, it says like, I don't know, like this is a book for those who have believe in the unseen, something in those
Yeah,
terms, you know?
yeah,
So
yeah,
I was wondering about, okay, what is this? And then this is where you said Kant. Have you heard Kant use the term noumenon?
yeah. The noumena, yeah, the hundred
Yeah.
percent.
So I
This
was like,
idea of
right, right. So what is your honest view? And I'm asking you, right? What is your honest view on like what is going on for the experience of the human being? Okay, or is it just a physical reality? Is it
oh
like
no, no, no,
semi-physical,
absolutely not.
non-physical? Is it, and like for example, I'll tell you something. Um, you might be familiar with this, but in the Upanishads, right, this ancient yogic book, it says the seer of the seen is unseen. So these guys, like just like monotheists are believing in an inconceivable God, these guys are believing in an inconceivable self, right? But they were keeping, like their minds had a space for like the transcendental. Do you know? So, anyways,
Uh,
what's your opinion on this? How do you see the dimensions of life in regards to mind, imagination, and reality?
Well, yeah, I think that's really interesting. No, no,
Yeah.
I think
No, man,
obviously
I'm trying to get
there's
the
a lot.
questions out there. Yeah.
There's a lot really to say about that. I think that we've reached a point where empiricism certainly has been defeated philosophically, I would say. Like, I think it's been blown out of the water at this point. Even within analytic philosophy, if anyone's interested in the philosophers, you can check out like someone like Sellars on that. I think he takes empiricism apart on the analytic side. On the continental side, I think it's been defeated since Immanuel Kant.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's gone really. In terms of the physical, I think that what we mean by the physical, like for example, I think there is an objectivity to reality. Like I don't think that my subjectivity, my subjective experience encapsulates the limits of reality. I think that would be arrogant
Exactly.
to,
Exactly.
to say.
So sorry to interrupt. So in my podcast and all of this, I call this the inner realms and the outer realms. So what's in front of your eyes is the outer realms, but what you close your eyes and see, you can still close your eyes and see, bro. Like this whole time we can do that. No light enters our eyes, but we can see.
Yeah,
We
I
can
think
close our
that's the thing. Like the perceive even. Like I think it's this. I think that once you like, I think Kant does a good job at showing that really what perception is the mental construction of reality. And then when you talk about imagination, this is where like I think if you look at, for example, Lacan sees the subject as a combination of the imaginary, the real, and the symbolic. And the imaginary um is this capacity to give something form, right? Like it like to give it some sort of like the like a positive structure, right? Like, and really he's taken this from Hegel. So Kant leads to Hegel, and Kant proposed that there was that what reality is can only be described through a form of categorization, through conceptualization. That what we see in terms of what he calls aesthetic, what he calls a aesthetic, oh no, what is it? The the transcendental aesthetic is the transcendental meaning the underpinnings, the sort of the
okay.
bedrock, if you will, of reality. This conceptual web, and the aesthetic is simply to perceive. It comes from aesthetikos, from the Greek,
Mm,
and that literally just means to see. And so it's about perceiving the world. And what Kant showed is that when you simply perceive the world, you are adding the dimensions of the world into it to perceive it. That you must mentally construct three-dimensional space, time, to
mm,
have a separation from inner and outer experience, from
right.
a sequentiality of experience, that you could go 1, 2, 3 and accept them as separate moments of your experience. You have to be able to demarcate them into separate points of experience. And that is you categorizing reality. That is actually an act of
So sorry to
your
interrupt. So
consciousness.
he's saying pretty much you don't know it's a cake until you've cut up the cake into pieces.
Or rather that even if the like if you were to say that it is a cake, you don't know it's a cake until you've given it geometric form, that you start
Right.
seeing it as like like a cylindrical sort of object. That it's, you might give it these are really Newtonian categories. You
Mm.
give it spatial,
Give it features. Yeah. You
yeah.
turn it into reality.
Now, that's not to say that Kant believed that reality was simply those features. He actually thought that reality was not categorized necessarily, and that what is truly real is this noumena, and that is this uncategorized reality, which is free from our subjectivity.
Right.
And like it's funny because I mean I reject that. I think that's wrong. I think that,
Why do you isn't that leading up to mind body dualism? Like
well,
in the
it
sense,
do, it
Descartes was
does.
like this dude was like, yo, I'm gonna doubt everything and then see what's remained. Right. So I get a sense empiricism kind of wants to break everything to see what's left. Right. I feel like
Yeah.
that's but anyways, can you share a
Yeah,
bit?
no, 100%. That's 100%. Like empiricism really wants to boil things down to particulars, which is where it's come from nominalism. Everything is a particular, and it keeps trying to get to the most smallest point. but the smallest point ends up being a nothingness. It ends up being like this emptiness where you can't really see anything about it, and that's demonstrated nicely, I think, in Zeno's paradox. But the the
My bad,
the
man. Can you
rationalist,
share Zeno's paradox?
yeah.
Can
So Zeno's
you imagine?
paradox is like the idea is like someone shoots an arrow, and then if you stop the arrow at any point in time, the speed of the arrow would have to be zero. It could only be occupying a single space in
Oh,
time,
okay.
which means
Yeah,
its speed must be zero. But how could its speed be zero if it's moving? And so you end up with this paradox of motion, right?
yeah, yeah.
Um, that's like a very brief
That's so cool.
explanation of Zeno's paradox. Probably even done it a lot of disjustice there. And Hegel, who I appreciate much more, says that actually the arrow's not in one space; it's in two spaces, and it exists as a being and a not being combined in
Mhm.
a unity of motion, and that you are trying to take what is a more complex concept, which is a unified traveling, and diminishing it into two um, extremes, which is abstract being and abstract
Yeah,
nothingness.
he's saying
But
we're taking one verb and turning it into two nouns, and then like
yes,
into
yeah,
so
yes. And
that's
and that's the thing. Instead, but he says that this is applicable to your whole life. This
Mhm.
becoming is what you are. You are a state of becoming. You are a combination of being and nothingness. Nothingness isn't a thing, really. Well, I mean, definitely not, since it's a nothing. But it's a negative force, and that negative force is particularization. You see, what Kant shows is that what we actually have is a unified consciousness,
Mhm.
and that unity of consciousness then allows us to split it up into bite-sized chunks which we can acclimate. And
Yeah.
without having that, it's just too much. It's just infinite. It goes beyond our comprehension. And that's why we're categorized. But he says these categories are only in our mind. Hegel says, no, the mistake is thinking that these categories are only in your mind. These categories are real. The ideas,
Mhm.
these logical structures of reality are real. But that's where you get absolute idealism or objective idealism, where mind is everything. And so this is where I would argue from. I would say that
Oh,
what everything is mind. And so, like, in terms of for example, what we consider, like, in thought, like, for the 2000, for a long time, what was considered matter was really a way of, like, matter began as a
big
concept,
point.
as that which can hold form. And so it wasn't a thing in and of itself. It's a thing which allows something else to be represented through it. And I think that's something that we've lost. And I think you can see this in physics. If I describe atoms, molecules, and particles, each time I'll have to give some sort of categorical distinction. It'll be in
Yeah.
space and time, and I'll take this material, and I'll try and break it up more and more.
And
And the more I break it up, eventually I'll get to this point of energy, and I'll just everything equates to energy, but not energy abstractly, because we're able to say that there are different frequencies of energy. So what I end up realizing is that there are definite and real demarcations between points of existence that are logically structured and observable in reality. These are not mental constructs.
mhm.
If it wasn't for these actual limitations, this, like, whether it's something like a frequency, or it's a spatial dimension or time, or whatever it might be, like, whether it's the 11 dimensions in string theory, uh,
Mhm.
all of these are what would have been considered a priori mental constructs by Kant, but these are objective. These aren't something that I'm simply witnessing. They actually, a lot of the time, we're starting to realize now, they're going beyond our comprehension to actually understand. And one of the things I actually mentioned in one of my recent videos was the talking about the fifth and sixth dimension, in terms of if we go beyond just relativistic physics and we start trying to combine it with quantum mechanics, you
Okay.
start realizing that you end up with things like, tesseract. You know, how does a tesseract work? It's a fifth dimensional cube, and it would project a four-dimensional reality from which you could then engage with. And the film Interstellar, did a really good job of showing what this would look like. And this, I think, is a really good way of explaining what Hegel is getting at. There are logical structures in reality, and this is the
But can I
result
make
of
a point?
a logos. Yeah.
Can I make a point? First of all, man, it's so refreshing to listen to you talk. Okay. Because it feels like you're like, I like how you explain. Okay. So, but the thing I wanted to tell you is this. All right. I have this view, and correct me if you see as if there's something off. I
Oh
have
no, no,
this
go for it.
view that there's a freaking rock here,
Mhm.
bunch of creatures. There was nothing. Okay. And I'm not saying divinity and all that. I'm not saying the stuff I don't know. Okay. But I was like, okay, physically, what am I seeing? Bunch of creatures on a rock. Okay. They were unconsciously moving. That means we didn't know we were creatures. We were just moving. We were just a movement. Okay. At some point, I don't know, we either see our shadow, we see other beings like ourselves, we see a reflection. At some point, some self-awareness arises. And I was like, okay, this could be the moment where this species freaked out and realized how meaningless and bizarre everything is. And so it had to tell itself a story. Okay,
Mhm.
to make sense of it, it had to create an illusion because the reality was too dehumanized and bizarre. Okay, so following along with this view, I was like, okay, so what do I see? I see human beings worshiping objects, right? We
Yeah.
see that in history. What did it move on to? See, and this is not my final view on, like, I have a very unique view on divinity, but what I'm saying is, I noticed it went to subject worship, man. So people were thinking objects are truth, and then it went to thinking subjects are truth. Okay.
Mhm.
To the degree that I have this intense opinion, man, like the religious books, like they're messages. So imagine like somebody sends you a text message and tells you, yo, man, meet me at this, I don't know, gaming cafe or something. Do you know?
Yeah, right.
And
Yeah.
then instead of you going to the gaming cafe, you worship the message, you repeat the text message, you make your grandchildren read the text message, and they don't even know who sent it to you. Do you know?
Yeah, I get
You
it.
see what I'm saying?
Uh,
So I was like, okay, so humanity, it's like it's getting closer. It can't acknowledge it's everything, and it can't acknowledge it's nothing. So it's playing a game. Do you know? And in
right.
mystical traditions, the ego was literally, I actually think, dude, it was like a video game to them. They felt like they were a video game character where you're not the pixels. Do you understand what I mean? As if they were
Yeah.
not human to themselves. That's what I'm trying to say. Right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's
That,
actually it's it.
oh, go on. Dive
One
in,
sec,
bro.
I have to I'll quickly reset me. Yeah, I think that's actually really interesting. I think if I understand what you're saying, like when you're saying like they think that they're a character and they're not necessarily like they're playing, that they get the I think that aligns quite well with someone like Plato. Whereas it's like this isn't the real world. This isn't the actual world. Yeah. I am a soul that will transcend this non-reality. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a soul that's not even here. That's the
Yeah, that's Platonism. Yeah, that lines really well with
but
Platonism.
let me if I could just add a little bit more imagery to what I was saying. So I had the starting point of being like, okay, I'm this being that when I sleep, I'm no idea, no thought, I'm literally nothing when I log out of reality, right? But when I'm in it, right, it's as if I'm like, okay, what am I seeing? I can physically move my body, but I can move my mind. Okay, so my imagination wasn't the same. Like that's what I'm curious to find out about you. When I was a kid, like I have a twin brother, he had like a hell of an imagination, and I was just I could visualize letters on walls, bro. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like that level of imagination. But at some point, what was language in my mind turned to image. So my thinking turned into a film to me. And then I could remember everything. I could see everything. Everything I would hear people say, it was a movie. It wasn't just sentences. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. So
So,
like
so the
pitch, I think
imagination
yeah.
changed, right? And also my relationship with, my private relationship with the universe. All like, so I don't know. Do you have something like that in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think that my experience, I mean, growing up, in terms of me imagination, I mean, I can imagine, but I was never one to be able to, like, my capacity to imagine, like, I'm good with abstract concepts, and thinking about them, but in terms of creativity, I can be creative, but I would have to really see it. Like, if I'm like, so if I make it, like, I struggle to imagine, there's that thing of, like, Leonardo, is it Michelangelo, before he carved out David and all that? They said, like, you'd stand in front of a rock, like a piece of marble or something. Like,
Mhm.
what are you doing? And he's like, I'm working. And then you just stand there, and then in one go, he just chisel out a sculpture because he's a fucking absolute lunatic. Like, he could just
Yeah, he
project
got
his
the vision.
imagination on real. Yeah, he's got vision. He's got that, like, kind of artistic. I do not have that. Not at all.
I don't believe that,
And,
man.
no, I think I have I can be creative, and I think it's a skill. I think it's something that you have to
Yes,
cultivate in yourself. Like
definitely agree with that.
and I think it's the same with logical thinking. People say that they're not rational, they're bad at maths, or they're bad at logic, and it's like, no, you're not. You just haven't practiced, and that's just that's it. I don't think anyone is innately skilled or not skilled to the point in which they could not in time improve that. Like, don't get me wrong, some people might be better faster, people might end up better overall, but it depends on how much you cultivate yourself will ultimately determine your end goal, and how much you could have done. It's like, yeah, right, like, like, if you're born with two legs and you have no legs at all, the two-leg person has an advantage in running the race. But in life, we'll find that some people end up obese and incapable of running the race, even though they've got two legs, whilst other people will be doing are Paralympians and they've got no legs.
Yeah,
So in terms of, like, the way in which the what you cultivate of yourself, I think really makes the biggest difference in your life. But
but let me
yeah,
ask you a
I
question.
never cultivated that.
Let me
Like, but
let me ask you a question then. Yeah, sure. There's a view that divinity is something you can cultivate, but there is also like the idea of like divine revelation, or like somebody,
Mhm.
like, you see a bird pass by, you follow the bird, and like a rock falls down where you were standing. Do you know what I'm saying? Like there is there like, to me, there is something about this world that feels alive. But the thing is, I think about, okay, so how do I discriminate? In my mind, every day I'm waking up, I'm being a new simulation of a self, but my body's changing slower. And I'm this being watching my body and mind change from the beginning of my life. Right. So bro,
Yeah.
I'm left as my metaphysics has just come to that, okay, unknown being. Even concepts like, some people tell me, like, do I believe in God? I say, if I believe in the idea of God, that's creating a partner for it. Do you know what I'm saying?
You
If
see,
I if I
I
believe it's
disagree. I think
subjective, okay, so tell me how you disagree, because I have
so.
this struggle of being like, yo, if I believe it's an idea, then it's not inconceivable anymore.
Well, this is the thing. I'd say that, like, it's kind of like Meno's paradox. You in Meno's paradox, how do you know about something if you don't already know it? Like, how can you gain knowledge of something unless you don't already know about it? And like, this is where you get, like, partial knowledge and stuff like that.
Would it be that
Um,
knowledge is created?
well, that's one way people go about it. There is no such thing as knowledge. A rejection of knowledge, in terms of that knowledge is only a sort of a fantasy. But I think that I would say, but then obviously, to even have the knowledge that this was a fantasy implies that you'd have to have the knowledge anyway. But you end up in an absolute horror story. But anyway, so yeah, so I would say that quite the contrary. I think that what Kant showed really is that the reality in which you live in is actually the phenomena, and that when you start attributing anything to the noumena, that's something that goes beyond your comprehension. So what Kant wasn't saying was that there was no truth. He was saying that we exist in truth, but when you go to the noumena, now we're breaking the bounds of human comprehension. And what Hegel says is actually the noumena is the most immediately available concept. The noumena is
Yeah,
just
I
abstract
agree.
reality. It's everything that is presupposed in order for you to have an existence already. If it is the unity of existence as you perceive it as an abstract infinity from which you can then
So tell me this, will you be left as a human in this perspective, or are you a dehumanized being to yourself?
I think my humanity is real, but like substantially.
Oh, but it's
I
not the
don't think
only thing that
no. I don't think that humanity is the only way that we could be instantiated. I think that the substance of what we are is consciousness, and that the bedrock of reality is consciousness itself being
an
constructed in a
instantaneous live stream, right?
kind of. I think that like it's like what you have, and what Hegel describes, he steals this from Schelling. External world as is a petrified intelligence. So it's an intellectual construct that's been petrified, frozen,
Uh-huh.
and that freeze is a logical structure. Now that is what, like, that's why, like, nature is the face of God, right? In this,
Mhm.
that that is God constructing creation from which you now have the opportunity to try and understand. There is a logical structure there, and in you
Mhm.
have the capacity to pattern recognize, to acclimate and understand various patterns as they form. And those patterns are real.
Mhm.
But what I think is most important is, like, if we try to break down, like, well, what's beneath the pattern, and the further and further we get, let's say in terms of physics, I
Mhm.
think Slavoj Žižek did a joke. He said he's like, God's a coder, and he got to quantum physics, and he just couldn't be bothered. He's like, oh, they'll never get this far, and just stopped coding. He just didn't code anymore. And it's kind of like that. Like, the more you go down, you realize is that actually that these logical structures, if you remove them, there's nothing there. There's absolutely nothing there. That you end up with an abstraction, and that abstraction is the same as everything's there. It's like when you said you fall asleep and it's absolute nothing. I was like, well, we're going to reply, well, how do you know it's not everything? What would be the difference to you?
Mhm. Okay, that's a deep point. Yeah, but see, let me tell you this. Yesterday, they invite me to this meeting. Bro, I'm there, and everybody is talking to themselves third person. They're all treating each other like vessels. They treat each other like interdimensional beings. Some people felt they were aliens. Some people, felt they were God, right? All of this, right?
Yeah,
And I was
that
like,
sounds
okay,
like dissociative
me,
personality
yeah, no,
disorder.
bro, I was there, and I'm like, yo, my view is that how would I say it? Um, I feel like our spiritual practice is to be human here. I feel it comes to a,
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
and
I like that. I
the
like that.
thing is,
As if yeah. Sorry.
no, that's just that idea, man. It's like, to me, it's very difficult. I can't right now tell you if I'm a physical being, because I have a mind. Because I could close my mind and see, I could imagine myself in the sky. Like, I can't experience, like, do you know what I'm saying? I don't experience it, but it's happening. Like, I am seeing the imagination, right? Now, my question went to who's seeing this, and I couldn't find a concept for this, man. So this is what I'm asking you. How is divinity conceptual, or how do you keep it conceptual?
Well, I think that the ways in which we define the self are this is, I think, Kant is like how do you define the issue is, right? You need this unity of self in order to cut it up into pieces essentially, to then have particulars. But then you only have, if you do that, then the way that you see the unity, which is the allness of these particulars, like, so you'd be like, well, it's all of this, was constructed from a unity which pre-existed the particulars in order to construct them, to then reassemble them into your conception of the universe or the conception of the self, right?
Right.
And so you end up with this horrible antinomy, um, in which you have to accept the unity of your own consciousness before you can propose the unity of your own consciousness. And and he's like, he didn't say there was a way to get out of this. He's just like, nah. He's like, we just have to. And this is essentially what his response to Descartes, where Descartes says, uh, you know, you know, um, the cogito ergo sum. I think therefore I am.
Mhm.
And he says, you're presupposing the I. You're actually saying I am, therefore I am. And how do you know that there is a
Oh, so you're saying
psychological
so Lewis, you're saying the truth, that unified truth is just true in the context before you even conceptualize? So you're claiming the truth like from a primordial position, right?
Yeah, that's
Okay,
that's
that's
what
a next level argument, man. I've
well,
never.
well, that's what Descartes doing really. So he's saying that there, but what I'm saying is that there is the self before there is the self. Yeah. So like I would say that this is a knowing of the self, and that they so that you have this, there is this
Oh,
knowledge of,
okay.
so there is this, what you conceive of the self, this unity of the self, is reality. The way in which you conceive of, sorry, so you perceive reality as a kind of individuated
Right.
collection of things. You'd have
As
perceived
yeah.
objects, you perceive like people and so on, right?
Hmm.
And that's already come sort of, you're sort of being we'll say pre-coded, if you will, to sort of unify certain things in reality, or like really like to deunify them. So the creative power, like what we, funnily enough, the positive power of creativity is actually a destructive power of um
Needing
of of,
space
of
to create, is
oh,
that through that
yeah,
angle?
yeah. Essentially, you are destroying reality. And like, so for example, Blanchot puts it, and he writes on like literature. He's like, for me to be able to say this woman, I must take her flesh and blood reality away from her, obliterate her. In order to give her the label, the symbolism of of femininity, of womanhood, you've taken from her reality. And this, I think, is really well described in Lacan, in the separation of the imaginary, and the separation of the imaginary and the real is the symbolic. And it
Yeah.
sort of cuts through the subject, and you have this symbolization of the world. But the thing is, without the symbolization of the world, there is no difference between, you're unable to differentiate imagination and reality. So then your creative powers are unable to be differentiated between reality as you perceive it. And this is the kind of like a rejection of this in many ways could be interpreted as the development of psychosis. So then
Hmm.
you reject the primary signifier in Lacan, like the name of the father,
Hmm.
which is the moral order. You end up going into a psychotic episode, and you're unable to differentiate between what you want to be real and what is real. Um,
Yeah.
and so you don't exist in the symbolic order anymore. And so this symbolic order is this attempt to attach meaning to reality. The thing is that reality resists any meaning that you attach it, and it is this constant resistance, which leads Hegel to say, well, Zizek to say in the in this from Hegel, it's to say that it's true that uh, the truth is structured like it's true to say that that this is a fiction that we are conceiving onto the world, but the truth is structured like a lie. The truth is structured like a fiction.
What
We,
a sentence. Wow. The truth is structured like a lie. That's heavy, man. That's sorry, go on, bro. Didn't mean to cut
no,
you off.
no. I mean, if it's just, I think that's essentially where I would say I'm coming from. It's to say that there is this sort of fictional reality which we conceive of, and we conceive of that in our, let's say, in our humanity. And in
Mhm.
our humanity, we conceive of these various dimensions and various attributes from which which allow us to uh, particularize ourselves into
Mhm.
individual egos. We are these individual egos, and this is the point. We actually are them, but we're also like
See, let me share a challenge that comes here. Okay. See, if we're saying mankind conceptualized, let's say, this divine unitary essence or presence of all beings, and that's how we lost in touch, right? To me, it feels like you got to sacrifice your humanness to be a divine being, like the conditions religions are putting. right?
You see, I
Do you
don't
understand what I'm
think you
saying?
do.
That means it's like you're sacrificing your inner realms. That means it's like you realizing, oh man, I'm this small being, and the creator of this world is so great, and then realizing who am I, and then you for a second your mind puts the burden of figuring out reality on something else, right? And a lot
I
of
mean,
people
I
feel
would
bliss in it.
agree. I would agree. Depends on the religion and the interpretation of that religion.
Right.
So,
But the
for
point,
example,
sorry, just the point I'm trying to make is that we're trying to conceptually understand it, but we can never,
I see
right?
what you're saying, and
So
I would agree
we're
if
left
when you
being
talk.
dehumanized. So the danger of divinity could be that being human stops making sense. Do you know
I
this?
would agree. I would agree. And I think that that happens in like Neoplatonism, and I think that or like kinds of a cosmism that come from that. The you know like the this idea that what is real is this abstract. And what I was trying to allude to before was this idea that you've got Plato who points up to this sort of abstract conceptual reality, and then you've got Aristotle and his hands flat, and he's not pointing down, but his hands flat. It is this mediation between abstracts that will find meaning, the mediation between extremes. It's not being or nothingness, it's both. It's not all or one, it's both. It's multitude. You gain a universality in the collective, but
Mhm,
without and this is why when you look towards to Hegel, and he points out in the three figures, in logic, and he says this is logic itself. What you have is a mediation between universality,
mhm.
particularity, as
And individual.
individuality.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and the individual is this synthesis of this universal in particular. But this individual, if we look at it, if it wasn't for the mediation of these three, this sort of Barillian knot that is tied together, then they don't exist. They're abstracts. That there is no unity, which is and this is where I'd say is a
Yeah.
kind
We
of
got to be
religion.
individual first to know the
Yeah,
unity. Is that?
exactly. Your universality and your particularity are only real in your individuality, and this is where I think the conception of Aristotelian conception of Christianity, I think, is bang on,
Mhm.
because the Father then becomes existence, the Son is truth, and the Spirit
Yeah, the
is
Holy
love.
Ghost is the mediator.
Yeah, and this is where you end up with the unity of them all as God. If it wasn't for this mediation, it's like God is man. He is man made real. Like you cannot. If you try and imagine God, it's like, well, look in the mirror.
Mhm.
You're made in His image, and it's
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's it's and
There,
it's for a reason. And I think that that I think
mhm.
when you see it from a perspective of that the substance is made concrete in the particular, that its reality exists in the particular, then what is divine is inseparable from this, that you
Yeah.
don't end up having this kind of like abstract association or disassociation with like a perceivable reality.
Hey man, you're speaking like a ancient yogi.
Well, there's actually a lot of relation. Like my friend who loves Hindu philosophy, he thinks Hegel stole a lot from Hinduism, but I think Hindus and Christians have just like, I think when we're really like, if we were to get into a lot of deeper metaphysical conversation, I think we agree
Yeah,
on
yeah.
a
They come to
ton.
similar metaphysical conclusion, right? But but the thing is like sometimes I think there's this quote from this guy named Swami Krishnananda, bro. He says religion is God remembering himself. So
Yeah, that's kind of like
I've
Plato and
had yeah, man, I've had experiences where I'm like, okay, it's not me moving the moment, right? Or when somebody random comes or something random happens, I'm like, okay, it feels like it's like invisibly like coordinated, right? Sometimes, not all the time, you know. But it's just this thing that if I'm truly religious, I'm not like my free will doesn't matter. You know what I'm
yeah,
saying?
divine
So
providence. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's the difficulty where I'm like, okay, even if I experience myself as non-human, as a oneness, imagine everybody was like, we're oneness. Nobody would do anything, bro. You
But
know,
this is
everybody
the
would
thing.
just feel we
You are
reached the outcome, right?
this is where I think Hegel's really great, because one, he says that divine providence is real, but it does not contradict free will. So like the you have this unity of yourself in as a substance, as the absolute, and the absolute is not in its oneness, or its allness, or its particularness. It's this mediation. It's that, like, it's not that you couldn't have the son without the father, and you couldn't have the father without the son.
Mm-hmm.
Like they can't be separable. So like if you were to take away this, and the way, some of the ways I like to see it is like, so like I had someone actually, like a professor at a university, it was at Cambridge,
Mm-hmm.
and he tried to ask us a question. He says, I was given an Aristotelian account, and he's like, well, sometimes we just say things are good, and he's like, and we just have to say that it's good because it is. And he says, like, look at God with creation. And I was like, it's good because it is. I was like, creation's good because it's a reflection of God as the creator. Because without creation, he wouldn't be the creator. And it is in the act of creation in which he establishes goodness. Like that is like that. Like
Yeah,
you
yeah.
look, it's not.
Yeah, I know what you
It's
mean.
you look. You're trying to.
The goodness is the nature. That's what you mean. It's in the
Yeah,
nature
like
of the being.
he's establishing himself in creation. I think like it's people like to see it as like God made everything. It's like, yeah, but he's because he's making himself. Like what he's making is not separate for himself. He's
Mhm.
making himself as God. So if he's made creation, it's good because he's the one that's made it, because he's making himself. It's not because he's making something separate.
Ah,
Uh,
okay.
and
Yeah.
and and I think that we're often like to try and like God is this thing that's like above and separate, and it's like God is right here. Um, and I think that another point that, like, like in terms of Hegel, when he says like about this divine providence and free will is to be rational, right? Free will is to act in accordance with right reason, so that you behave in such a way as to manifest a a good life
Mhm.
for, or like rather you manifest the right action at the right time for the right purposes. You engage in such a way as to 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 say that you did it,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
how are you going to take ownership of that? What makes it yours? And I think the only way you can do that is if it's your reasoning, and if it's your reasoning, then what you are seeking is truth, and the truth of the self. And if the truth of the self is nature, Thomas Aquinas says, for example, the end of science is God, like the goal of science is God, then to understand reality and to act in accordance with what is right is your freedom. But people want to see in our society, and this is a problem with I think the sort of particularization that I was going on about before, is when we think of ourselves as these abstract egos, we think of what is freedom is getting our own way, um, or we think of it as being uncaused, and these are extremes. It's either I am caused by nothing other than my intentionality, than my pure abstract intentionality. We're trying to posit ourselves as a kind of Brahman, like a kind of, uh,
Yeah, yeah. It's like
you know,
attention and energy and existence are just being one moment. That's
yeah,
the way I understood it, you know.
and
It,
or the other side is that we're trying to we're so disunified that what we are these fleeting urges that are manifestations of material beings, right? And it's these extremes that dominate the everyday conception of freedom. And what Hegel says is that this is because you are looking at it as either this extreme of being uncaused, or you're looking at it as this extreme of being unrestricted. And if we bring them together and we realize it's actually self-caused, you are wanting to be self-caused, which means you're wanting to be rational, which means you're seeking
right, right. But
truth.
that means you're not a
Then
self causing yourself, because that's the bizarre. That's where I'm trying to see. Like, have you heard this idea of like the causal loop? like the predestination paradox, where they say like in the future somebody builds a time machine and then they go back to the moment before they were caused and they cause
Yeah,
themselves
yeah,
again
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah. The
become like their
predestination
own God,
paradox. Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So would you say that like, are you, because in Hinduism it's something similar to that, but they see this world as an illusion. Like the Patanjali Sutra says, this world is the shadow of the real one, right?
Yeah.
And even in religion it says it's like, what is it, in the dominion of like the fallen angel, right? Which I interpret as duality pretty much. I don't know how you interpret the devil, but
Um,
I
I
mean,
think
this is a
I see
tangent.
the devil is bad. It's kind of like bad faith. The devil to will against your own reason, to will against your own self creation.
Yeah, a being that
And
couldn't change himself had to change the world instead.
yeah, like a being which was unable to which created a distance between himself and himself. He otherized himself to the point of extreme, so that he ended up being the negation of himself. He
Right.
distanced himself from God as if God was separate from him when God was him and he was God. And he could have been happy in that unity, but chose to be envious because of his greed. And I think that this shows the danger and I think of our society. And our society, like especially Western society, is the manifestation of that very greed that we're warned about
Yeah.
in Christianity, of that, like, constant desire for more and more, which will lead us down to a path of self-destruction. Because what we're willing against is ourselves. We're never going to feel like we're never going to be able to achieve a sense of freedom if we engage in such a way as to take away from ourselves our own glory, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to take away this rational structuring, this rational limitation of ourselves from ourselves, and instead go beyond it. Well, beyond it is nothing.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, this thing about like society, being less rational and everybody just emotionally reacting more, right? I feel it's probably, gonna take people towards like divinity and spirituality. Have you heard this thing Freud says, man? He says, as long as human beings are afraid of death, they will believe in the supernatural.
Yeah, yeah, I would
As if
imagine. I
it's
think
the
the
existential situation that's making us
oh,
religion,
100%.
rather than
Like,
the
what
religion being yeah, go on.
we are 100% at a precipice, I think, right now. Like, what we're in is that we are it is the winter of our discontent. It is the moment in which we are unbelievably dissatisfied with the meaninglessness of the abundance around us. where we realize the more we get, the less happy we are. And it's just growing and growing, and it's becoming clearer and clearer. Now, what will happen, and this is how Hegel says history moves. History moves between abstract universality
Mhm.
and uh, and particularity, which is the synthesis of the individual
Yeah.
manifesting themselves perfectly. But that movement of history, so you play your role in history as a free rational agent, which is producing the free rational agent, which is the producer of history. And all he had to do was postulate the beginning and the end and let you fill everything else in. That's all it is. You don't have to think of divine providence as a kind of
Yeah, it's a
um,
role. Yeah, it's
yeah.
rather than thinking, yeah, I know.
He doesn't have to think for you. He can give you your freedom, but you're not going to be able to do anything other than produce him because he produced you.
Yeah, man.
So it's an inevitability. It's the inevitability of truth. And this is I think the beautiful thing about it is that what we had in the Enlightenment, especially in, well, not necessarily in the Enlightenment, but like this in the a couple of hundred years before that as well, or like the 100 years around, well, like 100 years after that, is this very strict moralizing, where we constructed like we try to gain definite meaning. It was the bedrock of the scientific era, where it's systematizing and conceiving of reality as this like sort of structured, systemic thing, and it led to this attempt to gain this rational sort of Apollyon
Uh-huh.
ordered truth, right?
So,
And
uh,
all
so
it ended up doing was destroying itself.
So let me ask you let me ask you this. This is something I wonder about often. Do you think the way we're being human beings now is like like being an individual human being is a phase?
No, no,
Feel
no,
like
no. I mean,
maybe in 1,000 years we're just gonna be like that pure mind, or our minds are
uh,
gonna move so fast like we're not gonna be bodies or something, you know?
one second. I'll just quickly reset my audio again.
Okay, no.
Right.
Thinking about like the future and how human we will be in the future. Spirituality is dehumanized to some degree. Technology
Yeah.
is dehumanized, right?
Well, yeah. I
Fiction,
think
thinking you're an alien is dehumanized, right? So to me, I feel like there's an attack on the human idea, like the natural human being, right?
depends on what you mean by the natural, as in like what natural cognitive faculties,
Natural
or the.
organism. That means like in the future, your phone's going to be in your head, okay? Or, sometimes I think uh, like religious ideological systems, it was authentic to those people at the time. But for me to be a being alive now, I feel like I have to be a new being, do you know? So
Yeah,
I
I do
do
think we're being
understand, I do
increasingly
understand the
augmented.
spiritual perspective, but there's a part of me that feels like it doesn't make sense God wanting to clone everybody when he's created everybody
Oh,
different.
he's not. He's not.
Like,
That's the
yeah,
thing. I think that's the issue. I think a lot of people want to universalize the self. It's like, no, individualize the self. The self isn't universal or particular. It's both. That's why God is in everyone. It's Christ is the manifestation of God in human form. Like when God is a being, it is a human being, a man, a normal bloke. I mean, not a normal bloke, but he is a bloke at least. But like, and what is he? He's the most moral, the most kind, the most loving of
yeah,
us. That's what it means to be divine. And I think that we often think of the idea of divinity as this sort of uh as something separate from the truth of the self. And I think, and we'll lose things like our humanity. And I think one of the things, and I think it's our greed that's pushing us to lose our humanity more and more. I don't think it's just greed. I think there is sometimes abstract moralizing that can do that. When you think of like communists, for
yeah.
example,
I mean,
often
there's
used to
systems
postulate.
of power also. It's
Yeah, yeah.
how society and culture has gone
But
forth.
even in systems of power, the ideologies that push those systems of power is like, or dichotomies that are kind of converging on this desire to destroy the human, almost in the sense that you've got the communists who want the power of the universality. Like, it would be all for the best if they could just take away your individuality and become like the Borg, as a single unified
Mhm.
um being.
Yeah,
I think
planes.
Marx would roll in his grave, I think, but the Leninists onward, very much talked about like this idea of kind of like the postulated a kind of transhuman existence, and
Yeah,
then you had now you got our society, which is augmenting us bit by bit. You know what I mean? Where like
yeah.
step by step, and that's coming from not a place in which we're trying to unify, but sort of
So what is the role of
consume.
imagination in this? So why did God create imagination for this situation? Do you know what I'm saying? I'd be interested to know from
Because
from a divine perspective, what is the role of imagine? Is it
I can't give you from a divine perspective. I could give you from
no,
my
no, you know what I
perspective.
mean. I mean from
um,
yo,
but
maybe
yeah, I
when
know what you
you go
mean.
up in the clouds, then you can share the divine perspective.
Yeah, no, I'll
Okay,
I'll
okay.
I'll 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 send you a message
You
back.
levitating right now? No, I'm joking.
Like, but I think one of the things is that you could say that from like the way that the that what we've been given is the rational tools to analyze what is good and is not good for us, and what we have is the possibility of we have the power to create and destroy, and I think that's what imagination really comes down to. This we have this ability to perceive reality as it is, um, which allows us, through creation and destruction, we can perceive reality as it is, and we can
Mhm.
perceive its truth, and we can choose to engage in its truth, which means accepting things like ethical limitations, like moral limitations. I can't have certain things. I have limits to my life. That, like, I can't avoid death, or that that it wouldn't be right for me to consume more than my fair share, or whatever it may be. That I shouldn't hurt other people. And it also means positive uh, needs. I
S-
deserve food, water, and shelter. I deserve these are things that I need, that are good, that I actually, that should be propagated. And so that what we end up with is the means of
So,
acclimating our own nature and our own self. And I think that means that only accepting that which is genuinely good for us.
so, so, so this is, I was just thinking, so let's say I believe in a known like world, and I'm like, okay, God created this. And then I think about God is uncreated. Like that's the view I have. Okay.
Mhm.
That's not something that's created. So this would mean, uh, so, so does this mean that so you see a world that is uncreated?
No, no, I don't. I do think creation is so. Like, have you
Is
ever heard of
creation, is creation, so how do you see it? Is it just the divine or is creation, do you know
it's a
what I'm
part
saying?
of the divine. So it's a part, but not the whole.
Mhm.
Like the substance of like what is being created come from what I would consider a necessary being. So like the difference between a contingent being, in which we have now, is like a contingent being having to provide a sufficient reason for its existence.
Yeah, yeah.
Why does this exist? And then you go back. A necessary being is there's no way to provide. There is no need to provide an explanation for its existence. And I think that can be explained for the point in which Hegel says, in which, well, it is existence, it is truth, and to say that it is truth is to say that it is all possibility and all reality as a single thing.
Wow,
Uh,
man.
and that's what it is.
I just got this view that it's like, yeah, I don't know if you've heard this. I remember someone saying like, even though we're in this world, it's like we're in the womb. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like even though it's like this world appears real to us. It's like we're not intended for here. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, like it's like a like you're in a
We're in
larger
a cocoon or something.
reality.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well that's it. No, I think that's it. This is a world of soul
Divine
making.
cocoon, bro.
But I think that that makes sense. And you look at like the
Yeah.
concept of eternity in Christianity, and it's the realization that, like, so from an Aristotelian perspective in this, the unity of what you are isn't defined by the moment of each moment in your life separately, but as a unified reality taken as a single being. So what you are and what is your soul is the existence of yourself through time, unified as a conscious being aware of itself.
I got it, man. So unified, timeless being experiencing a little bit of itself in time.
Yeah, yeah. And
Ah,
but that's the thing. But then what you realize is that this existence of yourself in time can't be
mhm.
separate from the timelessness. Like, you wouldn't even be able to say it's timeless, right? You know what I mean? You wouldn't even make
Yeah,
the distinction.
yeah, in Vedanta they say the one who's witnessing the duality is not the duality.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And this is why when you get in eternity, in this idea of like heaven, and
Mm.
this it's separate from the eternality of God. So you have the eternality of God, which is everything. You have the temporal reality of humanity. Then you have the eternity, which is the everlasting, which, so you end up with this unity of everything, like heaven is this unity where, like, Christ is there, like God is there,
Yo,
is this unity of it's the soul as itself forever with God.
man, if I tell you my theory on this, my view on this, I think you might be like, bro, I'll tell you, okay? I have this view that in the future, we're gonna be an inconceivable, timeless collective being, which means at any moment that timeless being can come in time, right? And there was this view I had where I'm like, okay, these prophets are behaving like time travelers, literally coming into reality and shifting the whole story. Do you know? So
Yeah,
that scene, like for example, Christ is saying to like Father, they don't know like their sin on the cross, right?
yeah, they do not, they
He's
know not what they
talking to
do.
that
Yeah,
collective being as if in the future we're all the collective being, do you know? Like
yeah,
some timeless collective being, right?
yeah. I think that's a good way of that's a good way of perceiving it. Like truth is, this is where, like, Hegel, like, actually said that. I mean, that really fits nicely with Hegel. The individual finds itself, like the particular finds itself in the universal, and so the individual is the collective unity. So it's it's the unison of every of all. It's not the it's not like you are separate but one.
Yeah. I don't know. To me, it feels like in front of my eyes, I'm a conditional being. The conditions are dictating my like free will's limits. But when I also feel like an unknown viewer is looking out my eyes. I don't know if you get that vibe.
I
You
think
know,
that I think
there's a
no
sense of the
I
unknown, as if it's neither a subject or object, but something. It feels like something's here. Do you know?
well, it's funny you say that, because what Hegel calls it is the notion or the concept, right? The idea, right? And the funny thing is that subjectivity, and it is the unity of the subject itself, this divine idea. And so it's the divine idea that is everything, and that is the idea of the self, right? But
Oh, so the
the
soul is there because of the idea in the
the
mind.
soul is the idea. So
Ah, yeah,
the
yeah. So the
so
existence of the idea then could be equivalent to the existence of God or the existence of
yeah,
soul.
yeah,
Ah, okay.
yeah. And so, like, with your subjectivity is actually a contradiction, and it's what he calls a sustained contradiction, where you believe the external world is separate to you, and you take that for granted. That's where subjectivity or consciousness arises, where the nature has created a being which perceives, nature has from itself produced itself to perceive itself as separate from itself. Um, and so,
Yeah.
when animals are walking around, they're conscious, they're experiencing reality, but they perceive it as separate, as different. Now, Hegel points out is like, once you basically self-consciousness is coming to the realization that the external world is you, and that's what self-consciousness is, because then you externalize yourself. You look in the mirror and you perceive yourself. You end up with like the mirror stage and stuff, but you also engage with others, and through their otherness, you recognize that the reality that you perceive is limited, and the reality which is real, which is true, is the unity between your perceptions, and that unity between your perceptions is where you truly exist, which is why the I is an intersubjective concept, a
Mhm.
linguistic concept, which is then internalized and then allows for like sort of abstract thinking. Let's say, for example, I could imagine myself 3,000 years in the future, and so on like that. But it's only possible because I'm able to. Obviously, I'm not 3,000 years in the.
By the way, man, this my laptop has 2%. If it dies, right? Like the timer is also 2 minutes for the Zoom. If
Yeah,
it's
we
okay,
could just.
I'll go on Discord with the other laptop that doesn't have Zoom, right?
I probably have to go soon anyway.
Oh,
So
okay. Okay, man. So let me ask you a question.
yeah,
Would you like to have another discussion on this? Like we continue this another time? Like,
yeah, happy to. Yeah.
okay. Okay, great, man. So, um, I don't know how we end off this part one,
Well,
man.
no, I
I don't
think I think like
say some things to the crowd, man.
yeah, well, I mean, like in terms of the way that I think we'll approach it, I think that you don't want to fall into abstracts and extremes. There's no reason to think you're like a disembodied abstract reality which is infinite and unknowable, this kind of almost like a dissociative personality disorder. And you don't want to go and become like a bestial, self-absorbed like ignoramus who constantly tries to gain some sort of material gain and think that all there is of value is going to die with you. You know what I mean? And you boil yourself down to your urges. You know, the truth of
So we're
reality
left with
is
faith,
in between.
man.
We're left with what? Sorry.
So see, the middle ground would be faith.
I would say so. I think it's the knowing of the self. I think we're left with reason, freedom, and that's where we are.
Okay. Hey man, this was incredible. You know, this was my laptop's probably gonna die, but you want to let me know a date, and then because the last question I wanted to ask you is what message do you want to give in a bottle for the future generations of philosophers? Okay.
Okay. Love
But
thy neighbor.
yeah, but if you like, we can keep it for like round two or
Yeah,
whenever.
yeah, sure, yeah. I mean, my message for the future in all generations, I think, is love thy neighbor as you love thyself. I think would be the best message to in general because I think that encapsulates everything that needs to be truly known. Yeah.
Okay, man, that wasn't an original message, but I agree with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have to. I don't have to. I'm the not original messages come out of my mouth.
Yo, imagine your message. Subscribe to Perspective Philosophy.
Yeah. Send me back some money.
All right, man. This was epic, bro. Appreciate the opportunity. Hopefully we can have a round two,
I
and
hope so.
complete it. All right. Take care, man.
Take care. Thank you very much.